you guys are in for a fantastic treat. Today, Amazon presents Visionary Women, a conversation with a new wave of filmmaking voices with Miss Yara Shahidi. Y'all gave her a lot of love in that tent. It was fantastic. Thank you so. Where's my Jack and Jill out? Because I'm SSDC chapter. Hey, Jack and Jill forever, baby. I love it. Thank you so much. Yara will be in conversation with award-winning filmmakers Nikyatu Jusu and Mariama Diallo. So I'd love to bring them out to the stage. Nikyatu. Hi. Aren't they lovely? Aren't they beautiful? Fantastic. And ladies and gentlemen, Miss Yara Shahidi.
I turned the mic on, figured it out. Hi, everybody. Really honored to be here. I'm sorry we didn't get all of our photos in. Next time we're going to be like building some more time. But we're here primarily for this, and I'm so excited to be sitting next to two people who inspire me and who have moved me with their work. I'm going to start by saying this is a panel on visionary women, a conversation on new wave filmmaking voices. And I couldn't think of two better people to share the stage with than Nikyatu Jusu and Mariama Diallo. So thank you both for being down.
Thank you for having us.
And I know introductions were made, but I just want to say these are very impressive people that we have the honor of being in the presence of, okay? So I'm going to do a little run through because I never get sick of hearing accolades about people I admire. So Mariama's debut feature, Master, follows three women who strive to find their place at a prestigious New England university. We're both New Englanders, or have had very particular experiences at similar universities. And involves a really interesting blend of psychological thriller, social commentary, and pretty casual, but received rave reviews at Sundance, South by Southwest. Light work, right? Also available on Prime Video, which is where I watched it. And then Nikyatu Jusu marked her directorial debut with Nanny and won the 2022 Sundance Dramatic Grand Jury Prize earlier this year. Wow. Which is just incredible. And film Nanny, excuse me. These are all of my notes everywhere, and so I'm going to collect myself because my brain is going 20 million places. But you are the second Black woman to win said prize, which is incredible. And deserves a moment. Nanny so interestingly and intimately explores domestic work through the lens of one young mother who is working for a wealthy white family in order to pay for her own son to come live with her in the States. And so without further ado, I want to get into the conversation because you both poured so much into your work. And I wanted to start pretty generally because earlier this year there was an audit done by McKinsey, the consulting firm, on the state of Hollywood. And it remains one of the whitest industries. It surpasses agriculture, every other industry in terms of there being 92% white executives. They talk about things such as if there's a Black producer on a project, then there's a 70% chance that you get a Black writer, but if there's no Black producer, there is less than a 1% chance that a Black writer ends up on a project. And so you all are working within industries that you very much have had to carve space out for yourself. And I'm really curious about what has motivated both of you to enter filmmaking, but really what's motivated you to stay in filmmaking.
I had to. I love film. I've always been a film lover.
When did that start for you?
Fairly young. I mean, I think not necessarily in a way that I quite comprehended, but when I was 14, I decided very intentionally and specifically that I wanted to be a director. And I went to a Blockbuster that was going out of sale and selling off its stock. And I bought 3 films, Annie Hall, Itu Mapa Tambien, and Morvern Caller. And yeah, I was like, okay, I'll try to do this. And, you know, as a Black woman, certainly I'm faced with like obstacles and adversity constantly, even just in like, you know, walking down the street or living your life. But film is the only thing that I can do, you know? So I have to do it. And so I think that it's the urgency of needing to create that kept me in it after encountering a fair amount of BS along the way, definitely.
I will say that filmmaking chose me because everything I know now, and I look back at the beginning of this trajectory, I don't think I would have stuck with it. So I'm glad that Yara stated those statistics, because sometimes you're so immersed in the machine that you can't see what you're navigating. It's a very white, very male industry, and I feel compelled to tell stories. The stories come to me. I feel like I'm a vessel. This is gonna sound super granola and, you know, but I do think that I'm here for the time that I'm here to tell certain stories that I can't shake and that need to be told and represent us in a way that we are not represented. And so it feels like a mission, more so than, I'm not necessarily a cinephile. Like, I love the films that I love, but whereas you can be a lawyer and escape being a lawyer by watching movies, being a filmmaker, we can't escape this. It's everywhere. It's everyone's escape. And so I just feel compelled to tell certain stories.
Well, I'd love to piggyback on that and ask more about mission, because you both have made films with Master and with Nanny that have really large social commentary, even though it's a very intimate story, and it's a story that centers on few characters. So what is it about film in particular that feels like a vessel to tell these stories?
So it's one of the most powerful forms of communication. You can convince people how they should feel about themselves. You can convince people how they should feel about each other. And so I think there's a reason why it's very white and male, because you're playing God, you know? And so you have the power, essentially, to inform your own people about their own power. You have the power to tell Black girls that they're beautiful from the time that they're born with the stories that you tell. And so these are the things that are really important. There's a reason so many of us are shut out of this industry, from this industry.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's interesting to think about, probably of the art forms, it's one of the less open to interpretation, you know, versus literature, poetry, dance, music. There's something very, you know, suggestible about cinema, because you're not only working with sound, you are working with literature, you're working with images. It's really powerful, and it can be very dangerous if left, you know, in the wrong hands or with the wrong intentions. But I think that the capacity for the sublime and to truly render an experience in a way that captures, you know, human life it's worth, you know, it's worth the risk and it's worth the trouble. But I think that that's why it's so important to me, you know, when I approach my stories and I approach my film, or, you know, going back to your question about mission, it's trying to be as honest, you know, to myself and to my audiences as possible, because the capacity for deception is so high, because it looks like real life, you know? It looks like you could fool yourself that you're watching a documentary, but it's not, you know, it's somebody's take on what life is. So I think that that is really great, but very, you know, risky also.
Right, it speaks to the importance of both of your presence in the industry. because I just came out of school, thesis is heavy on my mind, but part of what I spent the last year kind of talking about was focusing on the work of Silvia Winter, who's this incredible Jamaican author, dancer, playwright, turned whole scholar. But the one thing that she said that I think rings so true, especially in hearing both of you speak, is that the reason why we have these kind of dominant white narratives in Western colonialism for so long is because they've had the power to control what it is to be human, which goes far beyond what it is to be even a good human or a bad human. And so thinking about the narrative control that translates into proper power and control, it's why both of your films come with real stakes and real weight in terms of what it means to be Black women filmmaking, and filmmaking about Black women. Well, there's so much. But there's so much to discuss just about the content of your film, so I wanted to roll some clips so that we can just make sure the audience is caught up and I can get into some deeper questions. And so here are two clips. The first one is from Master with one of my favorite actresses, Regina Hall.
She's amazing. I love
and
her.
Where she is interacting with another university professor. And then it's followed by a clip from Nanny, which introduces Anna Diop, who's also incredible, as she introduces herself to the family that she's nannying for in New York. I feel like these are two really great clips to show because these are really clips that show you how we're introduced to the characters and the worlds that they're going to be maneuvering for the rest of the film, which brings up so many questions on world building because you both introduce us to very specific worlds, things that we're even familiar with, but then later introduce these kind of supernatural elements. So I wanted to start to talk about, really starting with Master, how you located the world that you'd be operating in. You chose a fictional school. And so what kind of decisions were made into figuring out what part of your own experience would be brought into this kind of world-building process, and then what needed to be fictionalized for the sake of story?
Yeah, it's funny. I feel like I was kind of, at the outset of the project, I was a little bit in denial about how personal the story was, because Master is, as it turns out, a lot about my trauma of, having been an undergrad at Yale. But when I was writing Master, I transposed the school to Massachusetts, which is where the whole kind of Salem subplot came out of. And I was telling myself, this is nothing like Yale. It's in Massachusetts. It's very different. Really. And so it was interesting, though, the process of building out that world. And obviously, I had to pull from my life and my experiences, and creating the space of the college was as important to me to the story and as a character itself as, any other element. And creating a space that felt oppressive and alienating for, the main characters. And isolating was really important, and it's something that I tried to achieve, in the production design and also in the way that that I shot it, in the camera work and certain, decisions of shots, and really kind of trying to have a very evilly calm and very still camera, not too much cutting and not too much handheld camera work, so that you just feel like you're trapped in this, very oppressive, space, as I did.
Yeah. And you chose to follow not just one, but two Black women. You have Gail, played by Regina Hall, and then you have the Jasmine character, who we'll meet in a later clip. And was wondering kind of why you made that decision of approaching it from two different lenses, somebody who's now in a position of so-called power at the school, and then somebody coming in as a student.
Yeah, it wasn't always like that. Actually, the first draft of the script that I wrote was entirely told from Gail's perspective. And so Jasmine, was a character in the film, but we only ever experienced her when Gail crossed paths with her. And my producers gave me a lot of feedback. They really loved Jasmine's character, but I would tell them, how many times can I contrive for Gail to run into this girl on campus? It's impossible. I can't create more scenes with Jasmine. And I realized, I can just, there's another way. I can split the narrative and live in Jasmine's experience, which I think was really important, because if you see the film, the central events of the narrative are happening to her, and to be able to live in her own like personal experience was really important, and just to be able to see her world and get more insight into her. So it wasn't the first thing that came to mind for me, because I was kind of doing the very orthodox screenwriting thing. You know, the screenwriting books kind of say you're not supposed to do that, and so I was listening to them, but this is what the story demanded, and I'm really glad that I did that, because it opened up a whole new world of experience. And for me, obviously a lot of what, sorry Nikyatu, I'm talking
No, keep going, girl.
Please. I was just like, that was a good question. A lot of what I was processing obviously was my own experience as an undergrad and, as a version of Jasmine, but on top of that, I was thinking about the experiences of my mother, who is now, she's a retired academic, and of some of the Black women professors who, befriended me and took me in when I was a student there. And so it's kind of reflecting all of these different sides of one continuous experience. And it feels important to, ultimately the thesis and the whole theme of the film.
Yes, please. Okay, that triggered so many questions that apply to both films, but I want to hop to Nanny for a second, because when I first sat down and watched that scene in particular, it made me think of this moment where I was coming out of the Brooklyn Museum and there was this Black Power exhibit. And all of these white women were in the Black Power exhibit, and then they had their Black nannies outside lined up with the strollers. I thought it was a part of the exhibit. It was so poignant. And similarly, just in this scene alone, you see so vividly the world she's entering of a seemingly progressive space, of a space that's also exploiting Black people, not only in her labor, but even when you switch to the images that you see in the husband's office, and the fact that his whole career is built on Black pain. And so wondering, again, I know there were personal ties to you in terms of choosing domestic work as kind of the entry into it, but how you decided to excavate that world and be able to give it so much nuance, because I think it's easy to say, okay, we're entering a conservative space. It's harder when you're entering a space that's supposedly welcoming to convey all the nuance of what's actually happening.
I knew Yara was going to be an amazing moderator. So domestic work is one of the oldest career paths for Black women in this nation, in the world. Enslaved women, that was their first entry point into working and becoming independent and bringing money back to the household. I'm first-gen American. My mother is Sierra Leonean. We got Salon de Nade. Waiting. Okay. So, she put a lot of her dreams on hold to bring an income into the household. And so, obviously, every filmmaker is navigating a very expensive form of therapy in filmmaking. And, this was a story that was really important to me. And then I went to NYU grad film. I went to Tisch for film school, straight from undergrad. And I got to NYU and I literally saw what Yara saw, which was the visual manifestation of what my mother was maneuvering. I saw all these Black and brown nannies in the city, pushing mostly white children. And so it was like the catalyst for me to say, let me put pen to paper, let me focus on this story, because clearly this is not something that is an anomaly. But I didn't want to tell a straightforward drama. I wanted to play with genre. I wanted to play with horror. I wanted to play with Black folklore. I think there's a lot of folklore in this country that has not been introduced to the American cinematic paradigm. We are a nation of immigrants. We are a nation of so much diversity. And there's so much folklore that has not been tapped. So I wanted to navigate this nanny's navigation through these supernatural and spiritual elements in the film.
And I want to dive into that. So first, starting with the genre part, both of you play with horror, and it may not be obvious in these first clips, which makes it all that much more jarring in a great way. But I think oftentimes when you look at Black narratives, we're relegated to these kind of historical pieces, relegated to the telling of very particular traumas that you don't see us in horror all that often. And so wondering, what did horror allow both of you to do, and why was that the genre you chose in communicating certain elements of the story?
Can I start, Mariama, this time?
Yep.
So I think, genre, when people say genre in this industry, everything is a genre. Rom-com is a genre, drama is a genre, but when people say genre in the industry business-wise, they usually mean the darker genres, thriller, horror, and it's easy to teach people a lesson through genre. I'm sorry, I have ADHD. I can't answer the question with that sound. It's easier to teach people a lesson, to trick them into being guided to a lesson versus a straightforward historical piece or a straightforward drama. And I don't think, I made a vow to myself, and I told my team, my agents and my managers, I will not do a historical piece as much as I want to do like a Toni Morrison biopic or a Zora Neale Hurston, biopic. I won't do it in this iteration of my existence because this industry is not prepared to tell the truth. A word. So I prefer fantasy because I can hide the truth in the fantasy. And as Yara preface, the money is dictated not by our communities. So you have to kind of hide the message in the content in certain ways if you want to get your work financed. And so that's why I love fantasy and I love horror.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm going to be a little contradictory for a second.
We love a contradiction.
Right. I think it's true. But this, it's very complicated existing. And existing as a creative, I think that I don't want to try to trick anybody into believing something that they don't know, and that they don't want to know. And I think that there's a way that there's the new kind of paradigm in film, which is, what can your horror film tell white people so that they can get something and learn and grow? And I don't care about that. It's kind of like I want to describe an experience in the aesthetic way most true to the material. Mm-hmm. And I've felt really similar to you before, but I guess in my journey I've kind of realized that that's it's a little bit of a losing game, because you're like...
Let me interject, because I want to be clear about...
Yes.
Since you're addressing this, I want to be clear about it's a byproduct. My main goal is to showcase a Black protagonist, a Black woman protagonist in a nuanced way.
Yeah.
So everything that comes as a side effect of that is a byproduct.
Yeah.
And I think that when we center Black women in our films, we're inherently stating a message. And so we're maneuvering an industry that is not conditioned to see Black women protagonists as human. So everything that comes as a byproduct is icing on the cake. This is not, I don't write scripts to get white people to see my humanity. I'm not here to convince anyone to see my humanity or my people's humanity. If you see my humanity, great. Good for you, bonus points in life. But that's not, I just want to be clear.
Yeah, no, I think that also what you're describing is basically how, what allows the films to exist, is the way that they can kind of be understood and the way that they can enter into, mainstream discourse. Because like you said, if you're just trying to tell people straight up, it's a lot more difficult. But I think that, the most exciting thing for me about horror is just that it's such a visceral, subjective rendering of a human experience. And for me, as I thought about my time in college and I tried to reaccess those memories and dug back into that part of my past, I was living a horror film. You know, this was the way that story had to be told. You know, it wasn't like, it couldn't have really happened any other way. And so I think that that's like what's most compelling for me about the genre, is that it can be more truthful than just like, you know, telling it like it was. Like, this is what, that's like what it was. You know, the horror film version in art is actually
it's the everyday,
more true.
You know, it's not the jump scares. It's the everyday horror of being Black people in this world.
Yeah.
So when Mariama and I both get critiques around, oh, I wasn't scared, it's like, well, you're the antagonistic force. You're the monster. So you weren't scared because you're the monster.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, what I also find so impressive about both of your films is how you navigate trauma too, because we're in an interesting time in this industry in which, I said it before, but to reiterate, so many projects that center Black people are centered around trauma. And I think the revelation can also be that most of those projects don't have Black people involved. And so I really appreciated the nuance in which it didn't feel exploitative to watch these characters navigate these spaces. I remember there have been so many times in which I've watched films that center Black trauma in majority white audiences and felt that discomfort because it asked nothing of them other than to sit there and watch and be like, oh, shucks. Yeah. Like,
literally shucks.
And so, you know, it's really tricky. You both chose horror genre, and also thank you both for sharing. It's beautifully put to see how both of you approached horror generally and how it came to you. But how did you then navigate what you wanted to put on display for people, what you wanted to put on display for your audience?
It was, you know, it was challenging, and it's something that I had to think a lot about, because there's some traumatic stuff that happens in Master, and I had to be real with myself, and I had to really, you know, have a moment of confronting myself. And, you know, obviously you want like all audiences to see and receive the film, but really, like, I was specifically and primarily talking to Black audiences, and I just say, like, I don't want to traumatize, you know, the very audience I'm trying to talk to. And we have all sorts of images of, you know, Black pain. We are very familiar with Black trauma, and, you know, to potentially add more of that into the world is, you know, a very, you know, dubious proposition. And so I had to kind of make the decision of whether it was truly necessary to the story, how I would picture it. You know, there's certain kind of horror filmmaking that's like very aggressive. It's like pornographic in my mind. It's just like really like, you know, kind of like slamming you in the eyes, and that's like, for me, not the kind of horror that I'm interested in. I like spooky stuff. Like, I like, you know, I prefer the supernatural, and I like a slow build, but I think that it's about the content and also about the representation. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Toni Morrison has a quote. I'm not going to quote verbatim, but you can't linger in the crisis. You have to see the magic in everyday life. And if anybody's good at making jokes about things we should not be making jokes about, it's Black people, because it's survival. You know, we have to survive. And so we're some of the funniest people for a reason. And I think that, you know, juxtaposing the light with the dark is so important, which is why I love South Korean cinema. Like, it's a big influence for my work. They do such a good job of focusing on having a genre piece that still has that levity, still has the dark comedy, still has the moments of lightness, because that's real life, you know? So it's important to have both, even within horror.
Yeah. Beautifully put. And I want to roll another clip because I still have more questions about this, but I want to make sure the audience is kind of up to date on what I'm talking about in particular. So we're going to roll two clips that particularly focus on the way haunting and the way horror actually interacts with your main characters in the film, starting with a clip from Nanny in which you see the symbolism that you're talking about and the folklore that you're talking about, and then turning to Master to see the way in which Jasmine is starting to experience this haunting as a student. I have to say, You have to know how much I love you both as filmmakers, because I can't sit through scary movies. And I sat through both of these like this. The audience reaction was my favorite part. So to pick up where we left off, just kind of talking about how you built horror, symbolism is a big part of this. And I think, you know, we're in a room full of people that obviously care about movies and films. And I know for me, we're talking about hiding the medicine in the popcorn. And it's hard when you have something to say to find indirect but poignant ways to say it. I think I even have the instinct to be like, and then the character has a monologue on the history of racism.
You and the execs love monologues.
Right.
Explaining everything.
Yeah, it's really hard to not have these moments of exposition where it's like, let me just explain everything to you because I'd hate the audience to walk away with something different than what I thought. And so one, how do you let go as filmmakers to say, this is what I've poured into it, and we're gonna have a ton of people that take something different away. But two, how did you both navigate the symbolism for you of the introduction of folklore that some people may be familiar with? Some people may be familiar with Mami Wata, some people may not. Some people may be familiar with Anansi the Spider, some people may not. Yeah. And how did you find a way to navigate that? And then for you, I think, how did you're playing with these really interesting inversions of horror tropes of we've seen the creepy hand, but we haven't seen it mean what it meant when we saw it come in on that black student. And so how did you also navigate where you were going to pop in these horror moments and navigate, that symbolism, generally?
So Anansi the Spider and Mami Wata are prevalent spiritual presences in my film, and I trust the audience. Unlike a lot of people in this industry who are in charge of giving us money, I trust the audience to be smart, to fill in the gaps, to not need to have their hand held at every step of the process. And I think I enjoy work where the audience is allowed to be smart. Mm-hmm. And so I try to create work where the audience is allowed to be smart. And if you don't know about Anansi the Spider, guess what you can do for free 99?
Free 99?
You can Google Anansi the Spider. So I think, you know, navigating this industry can be tricky for both Mariama and I and everyone like us, because you have people in the room who are mostly not only not familiar with the stories you're trying to tell, but also don't trust the audience. Mm-hmm. And so I err towards trusting the audience. And I'm also in academia. I'm a teacher. I've taught for a long time, and I think that informs my filmmaking as well. And I like to give people a crumb that they can take and run with and learn more.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's a little bit daunting sometimes when you create a work and you put it out into the world, and then it's up to, your audiences to interpret it. However, it's also kind of nice because sometimes they'll add more, with their interpretations than you were ever even, I have had people make my film smarter than I certainly was, trying to do. So, that's the scary and exciting and amazing part of, having a work that's, outside of yourself. And then it kind of, feels less like it even is you anymore. It just becomes this thing. So I think that's really cool. And, the symbolism, in Master it was interesting. It was a complex pattern. I think that there were some things that I realized only later even were represented, metaphors that I wasn't even aware of. At the time. There's this, even one set of Q&A. So you may probably didn't notice, but on the alarm clock, it's 3:33 a.m., which is this recurring time in the film when the witch returns and is haunting this particular character. And somebody at a Q&A afterwards came up and told me that she did numerology or something, and she said it was a significant number. According to her, I never looked it up, but according to her, it's the number, $3.99, didn't do it. It said it was the number of the ancestors. And somebody else told me it's an angel number. I hadn't known that when I was doing it. Yeah, I think that there is sometimes this very lovely kismet of, you're you're working on an unconscious level and a subconscious level, and things come up that you don't even realize.
Yeah. I just want to add one more thing. You made me think about this. Safi Faye is a Senegalese filmmaker I love. She said, once you make the film, it's no longer yours. It belongs to the audience. And so that's like, you know, when I answer questions, I'm like, what was your interpretation? Yeah. Because now it's yours.
Yeah.
So.
Well, you both addressed the idea of films as a collaboration with the audience, which is so interesting to think about because you have so many collaborators before you make a film and in the process that it is kind of the final work of collaboration is figuring out and giving films meaning. Now, I'm going to be super amateur just because I don't have time, so I would love to know how much time we have because I want to give you all the opportunity to ask questions, and I could keep talking forever. Just 10 minutes? Ooh!
Questions.
Okay. I was going to give you guys 15 minutes, but I ran right through that. Okay. So, amazing. I want to just
bartering.
In order to put a bow on this wonderful conversation that I could keep having forever, I wanted to talk about collaboration. Because like we said at the very beginning, this is a very difficult business to navigate, a business in which you're often entering rooms full of people that don't look like you, telling stories they're unfamiliar with. When you were talking about folklore, one thing that rang true is, you know, we're doing a project that also centers global folklore. And, you know, we called on Anansi the spider as something that so many people grew up with. And, you know, we had many executives totally unfamiliar with it, which no fault of their own per se, other than the fact that they've never had to interface with the cultures that have made us, things that seem like such givens in our life. But speaking of collaboration, wanting to know behind the scenes, who are your biggest collaborators as filmmakers? Who are you leaning on? Who are people that, you know, may be unexpected that you really rely on to bring these visions to life?
I guess I'm going first. So I was telling Yara in the car on the way here, I love a woman-led set. The men in the audience like, what about us? But for once, it's about us. So my cinematographer, Rena Yang, is Japanese-British. She's brilliant. And it's rare to have a cinematographer who is a woman in this industry operating at a certain level. Most of my department heads were women, but also the men who were department heads had a lot of feminine energy, quote unquote, meaning, you know, nurturing, what we've come to be conditioned to understand as feminine energy, nurturing, collaborative, giving credit to the village. Like, it takes a village to make everything that y'all see on the screen. And I don't believe in authorship. I don't believe that it's one person. It takes so many people. So I'm lucky that everyone who was my first choice for my department heads, from Jonathan Guggenheim, who did my production design, to my producer, Nikia Multeri, who is a Black woman. We're a Black woman producing and directing duo, which is super rare in this industry. There are very few Black women producers in this industry. Everyone chose me back. Like, all my first choices chose me back in terms of department heads, and I don't think it's a coincidence. I love a woman-led set.
Love that. And for you, Mariama, you worked with Regina Hall not only as an actress, but as a producer. And so you also put together this really interesting set of people. And how did that come to be? Who are the people that you're leaning on?
Yeah, Regina was certainly one of those people, and I continue to be shocked that, you know, we managed to convince her to come on to the film. You know, she's a truly generous, lovely, amazing person, and when we reached out to her to offer the role, she ended up, you know, liking the script so much that she came on as an executive producer and was an important part of, you know, the film's development. And yeah, you know, I think that beyond Regina, you know, I think the actors were very, very important collaborators in the process as well. And, you know, we had an open dialogue about, you know, about the script, about scenes. Zoe would, volunteer to me her thoughts about what felt, accurate for her character, something that she
and
wanted
Zoe
to
plays
see.
Jasmine.
Yes. Zoe Renee is the amazing actress who plays Jasmine. So I was really fortunate to have a really collaborative cast and an amazing crew like Nikyatu. Lucked out with the rare instance of all of my department heads were women, and that was honestly an accident, but I'm glad it happened that way. This is like, I kind of hate, I can't believe I'm doing that thing where it's like, I hate when people are like, I'm a director who just happens to be black. Like, I'm not like, I don't do that thing where I'm like, I'm a black director. Like, what are you talking about? But like with these women, like they were just my first choices and they were all women. And I read afterwards, I thought it was an inaccuracy. I read in an article or something like her, like, all women-led crew, and I was like, really? But it was true. It was all, it was like, I'm not even thinking about you like that. But like, in terms of your sex. So that was fortunate. My DP, Charlotte Hornsby, also worked with me on my short film, Hair Wolf. So we had developed a relationship together. Really lucky to have a woman AD who's a black woman, Annalisa Lockhart, which was great. Yes. And so, it was very fortunate. And like Nikyatu said, it's rare. And one of the things that I discovered is Master was a union film, and that made it that much more difficult to get black people and people of color onto the film.
Yes.
Because there's blockages.
Really important.
Yeah, institutional blockages.
To specify that both of us shot union films, and so it takes you to a certain level where more and more people are shut out of the process.
And you can only choose within, a certain pool, and it's so messed up.
I'm assuming you're not clapping for people being shut out of the process. You're like, yes, to being shut out.
And the great thing is, and it was such a fight, Annalisa, who has worked on so many projects and so many more projects than me, we had to really fight to get her a waiver to come on. But it's weird because the unions are saying we want to diversify, and then you're like, here's a black woman that is being handpicked for this project and has a lot of experience, and they're like, well, no, and we were really trying to shut it out, but she was able to make it in, which is really incredible because that will kind of ripple through for the rest of.
Right. Well, I think what's so beautiful about that example is how films are a literal vehicle for progress, not only in terms of the narrative that's being presented, but by how it can be leveraged to give people opportunities. Because you all mentioned such a great point on unions, and as somebody that works on many a union project, it's rare. I don't know if I have been on a set yet. I've been on diverse sets. I have not been on an all-woman-led set. And union, the way it works is that cycle of you have to do a union project to get into the union, but you can't do the union project until you're in the union.
Right. Yeah.
Well, anyway.
Exactly.
I just want to say I am so grateful for this conversation, and I don't want to be selfish and give whatever minutes we have left to at least ask a couple audience questions.
That would be great.
But can we do at least one round of applause for just such a generous... There's a cutie with a headband on that I just had to point to right away who has a question. There's going to be a mic coming to you now.
Can you give a young actress and budding filmmakers and producers advice on how to build a diverse bodywork from Miles of Tomorrowland to TV and film?
What was the question?
I think that was for Yara.
I love that. So young filmmakers act... Well, I think... Honestly, it's moments like these, and it's about building your community. I think both of you touched upon it in answers, is that no one gets to do this alone or can do this alone, and it's actually a privilege to get to work with people that you love. And so I have been so grateful to go on this journey with my mama, Yara Shahidi, as my business partner, but that really extends to our entire team, is that I'm surrounded by people I adore and people that adore me. And it's really special because that means even if you hit different obstacles, you have a lot of people to turn to for help. In the white shirt, I saw you raise your hand vigorously, yes, at the first go.
Hi, I'm Jamil, another filmmaker. I'm curious about your process for building the visual language. Did you already have your lookbook, your Bible together before you brought your cinematographer on? So I'm really interested in the collaborative process there.
Great question. I love craft questions. So we had a deck. And we attracted our collaborators initially through the deck. Besides, I mean, there's a whole glacier beneath the water of, having producers and going out to people's teams, but the deck is the first visual and sonic barometer of what your vision is. And so it's important to collect something that speaks to your vision because your collaborators are going to pour into your vision, but bring their own ideas. And so the deck is the foundational springboard for that.
Okay, cool. Then
I have a question.
Wait, where is this voice coming? Oh, you already got the mic. I appreciate the initiative.
Okay. Okay, hi. I just want to say thank you to Yara. You guys did it. This was a great panel discussion. But I have two questions. I want to know, where can we view these films in their entirety, number one, for both of you? And then who inspired you to do the type of filmmaking that you're doing? Who are your inspirations?
What was the first question?
Where can we view the films in their entirety?
Mariama, do you want to start? Because this film, you can watch it right after this.
Yes.
Right now.
Please do. So you can watch Master on Prime Video. It was released on March 18th, so it's out there in the world in perpetuity.
And who inspired you?
Artistic inspirations. I think from literature, you quoted Toni Morrison earlier. I'm a big Toni Morrison lover. I love Eve's Bayou. I saw Eve's Bayou.
Yes, second that.
Yes. That's one. I think that Spike Lee is a huge, huge inspiration as well. Crooklyn is my personal favorite, but there's a lot to choose from. I also, on the white end of things, like
the preface for the white end of things.
Michael Haneke is, very brutal Austrian director. I guess that's like kind of more of the dark side of things that I enjoy, and so much more.
My team is here and they're gonna kill me because I can't remember these dates. But
wait, I think I have them.
Streaming in December. December 16th. December 16th, you can catch Nanny streaming and limited theatrical release.
By November 23rd.
Yes, limited theatrical. Thank you. So it's coming. Influences comparable to Mariama. Like I love a range. International cinema is my favorite. I love non-American content. South Korean cinema, Bong Joon-ho, Park Chan-wook, Lynn Ramsey is brilliant. Casey Lemons, as we mentioned, Eve's Bayou, is brilliant. She was one of the first Black women filmmakers who showed me that I could incorporate my folklore onto the screen. And so I love Casey Lemons.
Love that. Let's take one more question to round it out. I love the cap, so yes, with the brown fitted. Okay, Mike is coming to you.
Hi, my name is Langston Reed, and I was wondering what each of you guys' number one tip advice is to our upcoming Jack and Jills as influencers, inspirational people in the world. Number one tip and advice you would give.
Number one, that's
number one.
Stressful, just number one. Influencers, I'm not an influencer, but God bless to those of you aspiring to do that. I would say in general, stay true to yourself because there is universality and specificity. You know, and I think that a lot of people think that they have to study the trends of what people are responding to, but what usually pops is people who are unique and interesting and self-aware and true to who they are and the stories they want to tell.
I agree with that 100%. To add another piece of advice, this might be a smaller piece of advice, but it's to just create. I think that, you know, as Jack and Jillers, you're all very intelligent and ambitious, and it's easy to get stuck in your head. I think that, you know, when you're a high-achieving person, you want to make a perfect thing. And so you might start to make something and then kind of doubt yourself, or, you know, because it might not be at the very beginning, you know, the masterpiece that your taste levels want it to be. But try to get out of your way a little bit in that sense and just make something. It's so much better to make an imperfect, real, tangible thing than to have a brilliant idea, you know?
I want to add something to that, because one thing is always hard for me, but we live in a culture of immediacy. Like, social media has created a sense of urgency where people release work that is prematurely released. Take your time. Make the thing that you're confident in before you release it to the world. Don't succumb to the pressures of immediacy. Like, take your time.
You got it. I love that. Well, without further ado, can we just please thank Mariama and Nikyatu for their time, for their work. And I have to reiterate, Master is available on Prime Video right now, and Nanny is going to be distributed in theaters November 23rd, and you can catch it on streaming on Prime Video December 16th.
Thank you, Yara. You're amazing.
Please watch.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.